Welcome to another episode on the La Rapport. In this episode, the discussion is going to be centered around aggravated burglary. I have been asked very recently to opine on the question whether or not a person who enters a house or a building as a trespasser, in other words, a person who burglarizes a property, be it a dwelling house or a business, and if he enters that property without a weapon, and upon entering the property, if he finds a weapon in the property, let's say a house, and he enters or he breaks in and he finds a gun or a knife and uses that gun or knife to commit robbery while in the property, or theft, or to assault anyone, or to inflict any grievous bodily harm, if that person could be charged for aggravated burglary, because when he entered the property, he did not enter the property with a weapon. And my answer is categorically yes, he commits aggravated burglary, and a person does not have to break into a building with a weapon to commit aggravated burglary if he picks up the weapon in the property and goes on to commit offenses while in the property and while at the time he is in possession of that weapon. He, in my respectful submission or in my respectful opinion, has committed the offense of aggravated burglary. I'll be back to discuss that. But before I do, my usual disclaimer: this is not legal advice, should not be construed as such. For legal advice, please contact an attorney of your choice. Welcome back. Let's get on with the discussion.
To prove aggravated burglary, according to Section 12 of the Theft Act, the prosecution must prove the defendant committed burglary by trespassing into a building with the intent to steal, cause damage, or inflict grievous bodily harm, and also had a firearm, imitation firearm, weapon of offense, or explosive in their possession at the time of the offense. A person found guilty of aggravated burglary shall on conviction on indictment be liable to a mandatory term of imprisonment of not less than 5 years, with a maximum term of imprisonment for life. To set the stage to the answer to the question, it is important to look briefly at Section 11 of the Theft Act. Section 11 sets out the definition of burglary and the offenses associated with the. Under Section 1A, a person is guilty of burglary if a. he enters any building or part of a building as a trespasser, and with intent to commit any such offense as is mentioned in offense. Subsection 2, or b. having entered any building or part of a building as a trespasser, he steals or attempts to steal anything in the building or that part of it, or inflicts or attempts to inflict on any person therein any grievous bodily harm. 2. The offenses referred to in subsection 1a are offenses of stealing anything in the building or part of a building in question, of inflicting on any person therein any grievous bodily harm, or assaults any woman therein, and of doing unlawful damage to the building or anything therein. The relevance of Section 11 will become evident in a moment. In some jurisdictions, a person can only be convicted of aggravated burglary if they commit burglary, and at the time of entering the building, they had with them a weapon of offense. However, under the Theft Act and the Turks and Caicos Islands Section 12, which deals with aggravated burglary, is drafted much more broadly and is in line with the UK ATIS Theft Act. According to Section 12(1) of the Turks and Caicos Islands Theft Act, A person is guilty of aggravated burglary if he commits any burglary, and at the time has with him any firearm, any weapon of offense, or any explosive. The section does not require the person committing burglary to have a weapon of offense on entering the building. Therefore, in my considered opinion, a person entering a building as a trespasser in the Turks and Caicos Islands without a weapon of offense, a knife, a gun, or a screwdriver, but picks up a weapon or finds a weapon in the building or house and uses it in the commission of any of the offenses listed in Section 11, subsection 2 of the ordinance, is guilty of the offense of aggravated burglary by virtue of Section 11, 1b of the Theft Act, even though he did not enter the building or house with the weapon. If the person enters the building as a trespasser with a weapon of offense, the person automatically by default commits aggravated burglary by virtue of Section 11, 1a of the Theft Act. In any charge of aggravated burglary, the prosecution carries the burden of proving that the defendant possessed the weapon at the time the offense was committed. Let us for a moment discuss what at the time in Section 12, 1 of the Theft Act means. Let's look at examples of at the time in practice. Aggravated burglary by virtue of Section 11(1)(a) of the Turks and Caicos Islands Theft Act. If someone enters a building as a trespasser with the intent to steal, and they have a knife at the moment of entry, they are guilty of aggravated burglary because the burglary is complete upon entry. Aggravated burglary by virtue of Section 11(1)(b) of the Turks and Caicos Islands Theft Act if someone enters a house as a trespasser without a weapon, but then picks up the weapon inside the house and used it to commit theft, an assault, or inflict grievous bodily harm. They are guilty of aggravated burglary because the theft, assault, or inflict grievous bodily harm occurred after the entry, and the weapon was in their possession at the time the theft or other offenses were committed. Let me again illustrate the point by reference to case laws. In the case of the Queen and Stones, 1989, the defendant was arrested shortly after having burgled a house. On being searched, he was found to be in possession of a household knife. The defendant alleged that he carried it with him because he was under a general threat of attack from a group of men. The defendant was convicted of aggravated burglary, contrary to Section 10 of the UK Theft Act, and appealed on the ground that he had not been in possession of the knife with intent to use it in the course of the burglary. The Court of Appeal held that Section 10 of the UK Theft Act merely required that the defendant had with him a weapon of offense at the time of the burglary. Applying the mischief rule, the court felt that what Parliament sought to prevent was the commission of burglary by a defendant who might be tempted to use any weapon of offense in his possession if challenged or opposed during the course of a burglary. The case of Stones is an example of someone committing aggravated burglary by entering a building as a trespasser with a weapon of offense. In the case of the Queen and Michael O'Leary, 1986, the defendant picked up a knife after entering the building as a trespasser, but before he confronted the householders and demanded their cash and jewelry. The defendant was charged with aggravated burglary based on an offense of burglary under Section 9(1)(b) of the UK Theft Act 1968. The burglary as charged was therefore not complete until he committed the theft, at which time he had the kitchen knife in his hand. The Court of Appeal decided that the time at which the offense of burglary was completed was the time at which a defendant must be proved to have with him a weapon of offense. He was therefore guilty of aggravated burglary. So it is clear from case law that a person who enters a building as a trespasser without a weapon of offense but picks up the weapon in the house and used it to commit any offense whilst in the building commits aggravated burglary. And there you have it. Viewers, a person can commit aggravated burglary if he enters a building as a trespasser with a weapon of offense, or if he enters without a weapon and picks up the weapon in the building and used it to commit other offenses. I hope you learned something from this episode. If you did, please like, share, comment, and give the video a thumbs up. Most of all, thank you for watching. Cheers.